Director Sexton, when you're ready, please proceed. We have the presentation. I believe you have the clicker. We have the presentation online, so if we lose you somewhere in the clicking process, don't worry, our staff can help move the process along. So please, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. NWT is considered a leader in Canada for biomass heating. Biomass is the leading renewable heat source used in NWT, with some electric heating also available in the South Slave to use the excess capacity in the Tolston system. There's been a lot of funding from the NWT in Canada in recent years to support initiatives and research across the NWT. The supply of renewable heating in the NWT is mostly cordwood, as well as imported wood pellets. And although we're a leader in Canada, there's a significant opportunity to grow the industry and support the bioeconomy that seems to be thriving here. In this presentation, I will give an overview of space heating uses and in terms of the energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, a quick overview of how this relates to the current energy strategy, some context on what we're doing to renew our approach to energy, some context on electric heating, and then the bulk of the presentation will be about biomass and what's going on within the NWT as well as within GNWT buildings. The space heating is a significant portion of the energy used in the NWT. Here are two figures that show primary energy on the on the left, and then percentage of greenhouse gases on the right. You can see that building heating represents about 21% of our total energy use and about 9% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And it goes without saying that the cost of heating in our climate is a significant cost of living concern across the territory. As stated, our current strategy has an overarching goal to guide the development of affordable, secure, and sustainable energy for transportation, heat, and electricity. One of the 6 strategic objectives in the strategy is to increase the share of renewable energy used for community heat to 40%. We report publicly on all these actions under the energy strategy, and our 23-24 annual report should be released shortly. As suggested earlier, we're renewing our approach to energy in the NWT. The original strategy was published in 2018, so a lot has changed since then. We'd committed to reviewing it after 5 years, and since then, the GNWT has committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. So that will dictate how energy and our approach to energy goes going forward. We do anticipate the new strategic approach to be released by March 2026. As part of the renewed approach to energy, we undertook significant research and development work, and one of them was modeling of pathways to 2050, net zero pathways. The key point here is that the pathway includes a significant increase in electrification of space heating, as well as developing biomass for heating. That's going to be a significant aspect. And what that means in practice is that we're going to have to double our current electricity supply to meet the demands of electrification of end use, as well as significant extension of biomass availability in remote communities, including storage and territorial production and increase of biomass, boilers, and the like. One of the biomass aside, one of the things we do have is some electric heating in the NWT. This type of heating only makes sense, of course, in communities that are primarily fed by hydropower. And any significant expansion of electric heating is going to require significant grid modernization and shoring up the grid. What we're doing is we're completing the Tolston overhaul, which is going to increase the capacity of that hydro system, existing hydro facility. We're also advancing the hydro expansion in Tolston and looking at interconnecting the Yellowknife and South Slave grids, which will add capacity as well as redundancy and more energy security. We're also exploring policy changes to encourage electric heating. Right now, electric heating is available in the South Slave communities, but only for general service customers. So residential customers cannot use it yet. And it is on an interruptible basis, and it has a reduced rate as compared to normal electricity rates. In order to expand the use of electric heating, and look at how best to do that, we did commission some work to look at how to best do that, and one of the outcomes of that is we're going to have to look at how the rate structure is designed both in the South Slave and in other hydro communities to see if we can improve the economics and make it more desirable for building owners. Go back, I missed that. We're also doing some work on, and I think Mr. Hike will speak to this, testing of cold climate air source heat pumps, which would be, if the efficiency are right, maybe a viable solution even with current electricity rates in our hydro zones. We're also looking at the resiliency of the NWT hydro systems and the impact that electrification might have on those systems and what upgrades will be needed. The bulk of renewable heating is biomass in the NWT, and the next few slides will be about that. As I said, we're a leader in Canada, certainly on a per capita basis, for sure. We recently made some national headlines in the Canadian Biomass magazine, where there was a nice piece on that for us. And some of the highlights of that piece was that biomass is a good lower tech heating option that can take multiple forms, such as cord wood, firewood in other words, wood pellets and wood chips. They referenced the 2030 energy strategy and our goal to reach 40%, although those objectives will be changing as we move towards a net zero strategy. It highlights that the carbon tax has likely resulted in increased interest in biomass, and of course that is because the cost of heating has gone up, so it is a mixed benefit there, of course. And then a recent survey indicates that within the NWT, putting aside all the smaller wood stoves and whatnot, there are 96 large-scale wood pellet boilers, providing heat to 64 institutional buildings, 13 multi-unit residential buildings, and 19 larger commercial buildings. So it's a significant amount of our large buildings have biomass as a supplementary heat source. Some main facts about biomass heating. We recently completed a survey on biomass use, and we estimate this is about 20,000 tons of wood pellets used in the north, primarily used in boilers for larger buildings, and about 14,500 cords of woods are used annually. That number is a bit speculative, I think, because I think there's probably informal wood gathering in various communities. So all wood pellets in the NWT are imported from southern Canada. Its source is largely waste wood from lumber production in northern Alberta. And of course, most, if not all, cordwood originates in the NWT. Some of the large consumers of wood pellets include the GNWT, Northview REIT, City of Yellowknife, and Housing NWT. And there's currently no wood chips being produced or used in the NWT for heating, as there's some technical barriers with that. As stated by Mr. Ludit, GNWT is leading the way in this. Over the past couple of decades, GNWT is actively converting its buildings to wood pellets. As of 23-24, 33% of GNWT building heat is supplied by biomass. While the initial driver for the GNWT was to lower its operational cost and reduce emissions, this initiative and leadership by the NWT has developed a wood pellet supply chain across the NWT, which has supported local economic development opportunities, as well as allowing other organizations to convert to wood pellets because there's been a supply available in their communities. So between 2012 and 2024, biomass heating has more than doubled in GNWT buildings. You can see the line figure there, a steady increase. And it represents about 138 terajoules, which is about 3.6% of all NWT heating is biomass because of GNWT heating is about, through biomass, is about 3.6% of all the heating energy in the NWT. So it's a significant portion, GNWT buildings. Again, another chart to show where heating sources come from. You can see that there's a variety of heating sources, including heating oil, propane, natural gas, 33% wood pellets, and then 1% electricity and residual heat. So the electricity is primarily in the South Slave, and residual heat is things like from power plants and things like that. Combined, 52. The GNWT has 52 biomass boiler systems in operation in 16 communities, representing something on the order of 24 megawatts worth of biomass heating. That's a significant number. The largest installed boiler is at the new Stanton Hospital, the new hospital, with 2.5 megawatts of heating there. In terms of supporting adoption, Arctic Energy Alliance provides a number of rebates and programs and services, which Mr. Hike will get into after. A lot of this funding is from the GNWT and has been from Canada. The GNWT has administered a federally funded greenhouse gas grant program that's been one of the main source of larger projects outside of government for the past 6 years. And we funded feasibility studies and district heating studies and district heating systems, as well as biomass boilers. In Canada, also directly funds biomass projects advanced by communities, Indigenous governments, and Indigenous organizations. And I will give us some sense of these various things and projects in the next few slides. In terms of what the GNWT has funded, over the past 6 years under the 2030 Energy Strategy, we have funded 11 major biomass heating projects across the north, with a total funding of $8.3 million and a reduction of greenhouse gases estimated at about 3.5 kilotons ongoing. Some highlights include funding for housing in NWT for pellet boiler at the Stanley Isaiah Complex, wood pellet boilers in Mildred Hall, Range Lake, Coast St. Patrick, and Reladay Schools in Yellowknife. Money for the City of Yellowknife's new aquatic center to connect to the existing biomass boiler system at the facilities there, as well as pellet boiler in the Yellowknife Post Office retrofit. We've also funded biomass boiler in the large Nest Borealis development downtown, the big building, as well as a significant biomass district heating project for housing NWT at Sissons Court here in Yellowknife. On top of this, we provide technical and financial support. For instance, we've supported WECRT's biomass district heating study, a wood pellet and supply chain expansion study that we partnered on with NETAD Energy. We funded the town of Hay River to do feasibility on biomass district heating there, and we funded housing NWT to do biomass district heating studies as well. In terms of non-GNWT projects, we know of quite a number of them. So there's several being proposed across the NWT, primarily by Indigenous organizations, and most of these, and I think all of these, they're at various stages of development and would be funded through the federal government. For instance, there's a district heating system being looked at for downtown Yellowknife, some mini district heating systems in Detroit, some projects in the Beaufort Delta. There's not a lot of details we can provide on these yet, as they're not public and they're at various stages of development, but it does point to significant Indigenous government community involvement in doing work in this space. And we support these efforts with things like technical support and advice and project management advice, as well as letters of support when required. We know of at least 8 major projects that are in development right now across the NWT, led by Indigenous governments. Moving on, as mentioned, we did. There was a biomass supply chain study that was recently undertaken. And one of the key things we'll have to do to increase biomass uptake is to ensure we have secure supply of the raw material, wood pellets and whatnot. So we partnered with Neaten Energy to look at conditions for supply of barge-delivered wood pellets up the Mackenzie as a cost-effective and low-emissions heating source for the 12 communities. The study found that up the Mackenzie into the Bodell, my apologies, there's 12 communities along the route that we looked at. The study found that wood pellets could be cost-effective alternative to heating oil in most communities. We also found that private investment were quite successful in creating their own supply chains in the Sat2 and Decho, with limited or no public funding required, with the GNWT as one of the main customers for the pellets and wood supply. We also looked at some of the mounting challenges, including some of the climate change impacts for barging operations and how that might change and affect security of supply in certain communities, and what that would mean in terms of long-term storage to ensure that there's multi-year storage. So a very interesting study, in fact. Some of the known challenges, and this is my last slide, Mr. Chair, is we're reliance on really one cluster of main producers in southern Canada and northern Alberta. So there's a certain risk of supply chain interruptions. In fact, we found recently that because of the energy supply issues in Europe, that it's become somewhat more difficult to get wood pellets because they're being exported. GNWT has expressed support to the exploration of territorial production of biomass, especially on Yellowknife. I know that I think that the Cleacho are looking at some projects. And biomass heating, another challenge, are significantly more complex to operate. And I think Mr. Hike may have some information about what we're doing about that. So we're supporting some training initiatives for that. And then we also know that biomass supply in northern communities can be costly and affected by climate change. So we need to any path forward that we do, we need to make sure that we have secure supply. That's my presentation, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Sexton. We'll now proceed. I think we're going to hold questions at the end, but if you want a clarification, let's make sure we do it now so it doesn't get lost. Is it of timely? In other words, did you need to? Okay. No problem. I'll put you first on the list, Ms. Reid. Look at the enthusiasm, I say to our witnesses and our millions of subscribers to get into this. Members are chomping at the bit, as they say. So Mr. Hike, noting the enthusiasm of the membership here, I look forward to your exciting presentation. So whenever you're ready, please proceed. We have it as well on our computer, so we're able to go. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. It's a pleasure to be here. Excuse me, very grateful for the invitation to share some information on Arctic Energy Alliance's activities as they pertain to renewable energy in NWT communities. Just to begin, I'll provide a little bit of context for some elements of my presentation. So for the past 5 years, the Arctic Energy Alliance has been operating within the funding regime of the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund. So this was a large climate change mitigation fund announced by the federal government. The initial iteration of the Low Carbon Economy Fund was a combination of federal and territorial funding. And so that contribution agreement was signed with the territorial government, with the Department of Infrastructure in late 2018. So the 2019-2020 fiscal year was the first year where we were able to truly roll out that funding. With that additional funding, which essentially doubled the amount of program funding available to the Arctic Energy Alliance, we enhanced a number of our existing programs, and I'll speak to some of those programs through the presentation. But we also created several new programs that had been identified as gaps in our funding offer by virtue of an operational review that was done in 2017-2018. So I'll get into some of those programs as they pertain to renewable energy in NWT communities. Before I move on, I'll just mention that this fiscal year, 2024-2025, We essentially, this last fiscal year marked the end of the low carbon economy leadership funding. So in this fiscal year, we have reverted to essentially our funding levels from 2018, 2019, which has posed some challenges, which I'll get into a little bit during the presentation. Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if we have I did have a presentation, but I'm not sure it's not up on the screen at the moment. There we are.
Oh, okay, I was just going to pause and ask us to wait till we have it, but all members have it as well. So on our laptops, or I should say our whatever we call these things in front of us. So we're fine. So, and again, if you have trouble, we have staff who can advance the slides. Please.
Now, so that's great. Oh, at the. Oh, there we go. So go back one. There we go. Perfect. So the first program I'd like to share some information about, and it's probably our most relevant program as it pertains to renewable energy, is our Alternative Energy Technologies program. So this program funds, as it implies, renewable energy systems, both for space heating and for power generation. Traditionally and historically, the Alternative Energy Technologies program, which is a bit of a mouthful, so I'll refer to it as ATIP, which is what we do internally, has funded, most of the funding has gone to solar PV systems. There has been some small-scale wind projects that we've supported as well, but as an organization, we've put a renewed emphasis on space heating and specifically biomass for space heating over the last several years, and I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about some of the measures we've taken to try to encourage more uptake of biomass for space heating, particularly at a smaller scale. Mr. Sexton alluded to the fact that the GNWT, the City of Yellowknife, some big landlords have moved quite aggressively towards biomass for space heating. And so as an organization, we are focusing on smaller scale projects at the residential level in particular, but also with community and Indigenous governments and businesses. So you can see the figures here. Over the years, basically the number of rebates we've issued for solar PV, you can see in the table on the left-hand side. There's been a bit of an ebb and flow in the popularity of solar PV installations, but you can see on the right-hand column under biomass that we have seen a fairly steady growth in the popularity of biomass systems that have been funded by this program as well. And we continue to emphasize biomass with our audience and with our clients to try to increase uptake in that regard. I'll just mention in 2019-2020, so the first year under the Low Carbon Economy Fund, we increased our maximum rebate levels for individuals and businesses to $20,000 up to 50% of total project cost, and for individuals up to $20,000, for businesses, community and Indigenous governments up to $50,000 up to 50%. So that marked a significant increase from rebate levels pre-Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund as a way to truly incentivize people and businesses and community governments to make those kinds of changes. As I mentioned, we have had a couple small-scale wind projects as well that we've funded, but I haven't included them here because they're fairly marginal. I'll just mention as well, Mr. Sexton spoke about electric heating. Under the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund, we did initially have a program designed specifically to support electric heating systems in South Slave hydro-connected communities. We did not see a lot of uptake for that program in its first year. So we were fortunate to have the flexibility from the Department of Infrastructure to roll that funding into the Alternative Technologies, Energy Technologies program. So it continues to be an eligible technology that we will fund. However, to this point, we have not seen a lot of uptake for that. And that kind of comes back to, I think, some of the policy challenges that Mr. Sexton mentioned the department is working on in terms of the interruptible rate and how that rate is calculated, and of course the fact that it is interruptible. So I think if some of those policy changes were to happen, then we would likely see greater uptake for electric heating in the South Slave. The other program, or one of the other programs that we administer that has a certain focus on renewable energy is our Energy Efficiency Incentive Program, internally referred to as EEP. So this program provides rebates for a number of energy efficient products such as Energy Star appliances, LED lighting, programmable thermostats, high efficiency pumps, and it also provides funding for wood stoves and pellet stoves. So you can see this is a very popular product within this program, and you can see kind of a big jump in 2020, 2021. One of the interesting things we saw with this program at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic was, as with all our programs in the spring of 2020, things got very quiet for a couple of months as people adjusted to sort of our new reality in that scenario. But by the time summer set in in 2020, I think a lot of people across the territory realized they weren't going to be traveling much, they weren't going to be spending on summer vacations, and people started investing in their homes. So we saw a lot of funding applications for energy efficiency retrofits for homes, as well as things like pellets and wood stoves. And as of the summer of 2020, many of our programs really took off. So you can see that particularly in 2020, 2021 fiscal year, wood and pellet stoves were a very popular item. Last fiscal year in 2023-24, we, in recognition of the inflationary pressures that households and others were experiencing across the territory, we increased the maximum rebate level from $1,000 to $2,000 for wood stoves and pellet stoves. And so that has been, again, quite popular. So you can see the uptake swinging upwards in the 23-24 fiscal year, which has been a positive development. Unfortunately, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, because we've now reverted to 2018-2019 funding levels in the absence of the low carbon economy funding, this program is currently closed to new applications. It's been closed for about a month because the budget for this program's incentives ultimately ran out. A new program that we had offered kind of as a one-off in prior years, but revived as a consistently delivered program over the last 5 years with that low carbon economy leadership funding is our community wood stove program. An extremely popular program right across the territory. We have worked on this program with several communities. I'll share those communities in a moment. But essentially, the design of this program is based on a partnership model. So we partner with community and Indigenous governments on a 50-50 cost share basis. The Arctic Energy Alliance looks after all of the logistics of conducting scoping visits to communities and into people's homes to take measurements, determine the types of materials that are needed, the appropriate size of wood stove for a home. And then we look after the logistics of ordering those stoves, transporting them across the country, and up to the communities where they'll ultimately be installed. The community partner provides the other 50% of the funding. So to the end user, to the homeowner or the resident of the home that gets the wood stove, there's no cost. The community partner also provides some in-kind services in terms of storage of the wood stoves after they've arrived, as well as some equipment during the installation phase. So very exciting, a very popular program. Unfortunately, and this will be a theme I return to a couple times through the presentation, we were not able to deliver this program due to the absence of low carbon economy leadership funding in this fiscal year. So there's still plenty of interest out there across the territory, and so we're hopeful that we'll be able to identify some funding in future years to be able to revive the community wood stove program. One of the benefits, apart from helping Northerners reduce their energy costs and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, these stoves are installed by WET certified installers, which is a designation for people that have a certification to properly install wood stoves, and there's a training program that goes along with that WET certification. So what we've found is that oftentimes when we conduct scoping visits to homes, people may have an existing wood stove in their home that was not installed properly and can actually pose a very serious safety risk in those homes. And so by virtue of replacing some of those older stoves that were not installed properly, there's also an enhanced safety element to the homes that are receiving those wood stoves. Over the last 5 years, we've partnered with the following communities. Jean Marie River, Samba Cay, Betchico, Gamity, Wati, Wekwati, Delaney, Litzel Cay, Nahanni Butte, and Fort McPherson. So in virtually every region of the territory, we've found willing and able partners. And so we're hopeful that if we can identify some funding in future years, we'll be able to bring this program back and build upon the partnerships that we've had for the past several years. If I could just kind of take a step back from the details of how the program is delivered. These are some photos from last year in Nahanni Butte. Part of the program also involves hiring local laborers in those communities that we're working in. And so we work with a company out of Winnipeg that we've got a historical relationship with in terms of the installation of the wood stoves. But we also ensure that we reach out within the communities we're working in, to hire local laborers to help with the projects, but also to try to identify individuals who may have an interest in a career in wood stove installation or maintenance. And so we've had individuals, including in Nahanni Butte, who have been interested in becoming wet certified installers. And as part of that training process, you have to basically participate in the installation of a certain number of stoves to get your certification. So we've worked with individuals to help them kind of accumulate that experience and work with the experienced installers that we contract to do the work. So Nahanni Butte presents a rather unique, beautiful backdrop to this kind of work. We do have a 3-minute video up on our YouTube channel, probably not as many subscribers as the Legislative Assembly has, but it's a lovely video if anybody's interested in having a look at it, and it focuses specifically on our work in Nahanni Butte last year. I'll just mention too that this program it's logistically challenging, as many of you might imagine, to be working in remote and isolated communities, many of which have no year-round road access. In many of those communities, we will transport the stoves in 1 year and then complete installation in a second year. But despite some of those challenges and the inevitable hiccups that come along with projects like this, I often kind of step back and think about the idea that here we are taking funding from our territorial partners and also from the federal government. We're pumping it into Canadian-made wood stoves. We're seeing those transported across the country until they make their way up, isolated ice roads up to communities that don't have year-round access. And at the end of the day, you have people who need to see their energy costs reduced with that wonderful wood stove heating in their homes that's helping them bring down their costs, but also, as I mentioned earlier, increasing the safety. So we have a lot of photos of happy elders with their new wood stoves, and again, I'll just reiterate the point, we would love to be able to bring this program back in the future. Apart from our rebate programs, we also have our biomass program funded exclusively by the territorial government. You'll see here a lovely screenshot of our Biomass Week, which is an online conference that we've been organizing for the past few years. This is from a couple of years ago during the opening session. It is entirely online, and we do about half-day sessions for 5 days. So coming up in 2025, January 27th through 31st will be Biomass Week. You'll see in the lower left-hand corner of the screenshot, we had Minister Dan Vandal from the federal government as part of the opening a couple of years ago, and of course Mr. Sexton up in the top left, and another AEA employee on the bottom right who's now an employee of Department of Infrastructure. So it's been a great opportunity to promote biomass, to be able to share the experiences, not just of people here in the Northwest Territories, but in fact around the world. We do garner an international audience for this online conference. Last year, I think we had in excess of 300 registrants for the conference. So it's a great way to kind of celebrate the successes we've had with biomass, but also turn our attention to the future to see what's possible sort of in the next round of investments. So registration is free. It's open on our website currently. If any members of the committee are interested in participating in all or some of Biomass Week, you're more than welcome to sign up for that. I'll also mention the biomass program itself. While it's not a funding program that provides funds for biomass projects, it basically pays for technical staff at Arctic Energy Alliance to provide advice and things like pre-feasibility studies for communities that are interested looking at larger biomass installations and projects. So we've worked with numerous communities. Hay River was one of the most recent, but communities throughout the Northwest Territories have come to us with ideas for biomass projects, and we're able to look at the types of buildings that they would like to hook those district heating systems up to, provide energy audits on those buildings to determine the heat load and the heat demand, and then recommend sort of appropriate sizing of boilers and things like that. I would say one of the real success stories we've seen there is a district heating system in Wati, where the community government actually owns the system, and they have a heat sale agreement with the territorial government to sell heat to some territorial buildings in the community. So that's an example of a community government that's able not only to benefit themselves from the savings that biomass heating provides and the greenhouse gas emission reductions that benefit the environment, but also to create a new revenue stream for the community government, which is a very popular thing for community governments to look at. Also just mentioned, because Mr. Sexton mentioned the Yellowknife Downtown District Energy System study. The Arctic Energy Alliance supported that study by providing building data on buildings that we had previously audited, and also we conducted some new energy analysis on buildings that hadn't been audited, such that the authors of that study had kind of the latest information on heat load and what would be required to create a district energy system for downtown Yellowknife. Just a quick aside, I was attending an energy conference in Vancouver in early November, which included a site visit to Simon Fraser University's Burnaby Mountain District Energy System. It's a biomass heating district heating system that uses wood chips, and it is approximately 4 to 5 times the size of what would be required for a downtown district energy system in Yellowknife. So certainly it's feasible, it's very much within the realm of possibility, and as I said, they're using wood chips there, which are even a lower cost option than wood pellets. Another project we've supported out of our biomass program is biomass boiler operator training. So this is a training course, 2-day training course that was originally introduced by Macca's School of Community Government in 2018. It was offered once or twice back then, and then unfortunately because of the pandemic, it kind of went by the wayside. So one of the things we've observed as a major need, Mr. Sexton mentioned it also, is on the capacity building side within our communities, is the need to train and get boiler operators familiar with using biomass boilers in particular. It is a different type of maintenance than what you see with oil burning boilers. So it's important, if we're rolling out these kinds of technologies, they're only as good as the people on the ground who are going to be operating and maintaining them. So we pulled together some partners for this, Housing NWT, Infrastructure, MACA, and the Northwest Territories Association of Communities. This was several months ago, and sort of introduced the idea. There was considerable demand to try to offer this training again. So in early November, we held this course here in Yellowknife. We brought an instructor in from a company called Fink Machines, who's had a lot of experience installing biomass systems in the north. And we had 20 participants split between Housing NWT, Infrastructure, and several community governments. So we wanted to kind of get the ball rolling on this and see if it was something that there was further interest in. We've talked to the instructor, and we've talked internally at AEA, and we've had a debrief with all the partners mentioned here, and there's very much interest in pursuing this again. So we're currently exploring opportunities to offer this training once again. It was a combination of classroom instruction and on-site instruction, and the participants unanimously really enjoyed the content and appreciated the opportunity to learn more about operating and maintaining biomass boilers. Also mentioned by Mr. Sexton, and electric heating and electrification, as we know, is a big part of the GNWT's 2030 energy strategy. We've heard a lot about air source heat pumps, particularly from southern jurisdictions like British Columbia, Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Manitoba even. Generally places where electricity is cheap. Air source heat pumps have been a very popular solution to moving off of fossil fuels. There's a couple challenges with air source heat pumps. Number one, as mentioned, they use electricity. So when you're paying, 32 or 33 cents an hour, a kilowatt hour for electricity, the financial viability of the technology can be called into question. Also, they become much less efficient at colder temperatures. So given that kind of general knowledge, we wanted to test them in a climate like Yellowknife's. So about approximately 2 years ago, we started a demonstration project in partnership with Housing NWT. We had 2 heat pumps installed in 2 of their units here in Yellowknife. We are just coming to the end of the 2-year monitoring timeframe, and we expect to have a final report on that iteration of the demonstration project sometime in January. So we're excited to see what the results of that monitoring project reveal, and whether it's something that we should recommend and provide rebates for in the future. We do want to increase the data set that we're working with. So more recently, we've expanded the demonstration project. We are partnering with a local private landlord here in Yellowknife in some townhomes. And actually, as we're sitting here, I think the project team is on site, kind of making the final connections for those 2 additional heat pumps that we'll be monitoring over the next 2 years. So we're very keen. We know there's a lot of questions. We get a lot of questions about the viability of heat pumps in a climate like Yellowknife with what we pay for electricity. And just in a kind of in a nutshell, as opposed to sort of a 1-to-1 ratio that you would have with a normal electric boiler of energy to heat, basically heat pumps can provide more energy than or more heat than the electricity that's coming into the heat pump itself. It's much more complicated than that, and I'm not a technical person, so I'm not going to try to explain it. But it holds a lot of potential, I think, for some of the challenges in terms of how much we need to grow our generation capacity here in the Northwest Territories if we're going to move to electrification of space heating. All right. One other project that we've launched just in the last few months is a firewood access training program. We got to work on the name of the program a little bit. It's a little nebulous, but essentially what we wanted to do this was in response to kind of the emerging energy crisis in Norman Wells, as we're all familiar with the massive increase that they've seen in fuel prices in the last few months. So we wanted to be able to provide a safety training course for harvesting wood. So we held one session in the fall in Norman Wells. We had participants just from Norman Wells for that one. And it included 2 components. So we had a contractor here from Yellowknife who is certified in providing chainsaw safety courses. And you can see some photos here of some of the participants in that training course. And so there were 2 days of instruction on safe wood harvesting, proper wood harvesting. From that, we also produced what we're calling the Northern Firewood Manual. So it's an opportunity for people to learn a little bit about proper operation of wood stoves, but also the types of fuel wood that people should be harvesting to safely use wood heating in their homes. And we also included a component on starting a small business. So trying to spur on local economic development from wood harvesting. And we had support from Departments of Education, Culture and Employment, Industry, Tourism and Investment, as well as the town of Norman Wells to put on this training. So we've just offered it a second time, last week in fact, in Norman Wells. We had 12 participants. This time there were also representatives from other communities in the Sawtooth region, along with some representatives from Norman Wells. So it's been very popular in the 2 offerings we've provided, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue this type of instruction and training in the future in other regions across the territory. Coming to the end here, but while it's not a renewable energy technology per se, it does rely on renewable energy such as hydroelectricity. So I wanted to spend a moment just talking about our electric vehicle rebate program. We launched this program in the summer of 2020. And you can see some numbers here. When we launched in 2020, we weren't sure how popular it would be. We know there's always lots of questions about electric vehicles, how they're going to work in a climate like the Northwest Territories. If you ever want to start a Facebook debate, just start talking about electric vehicles and the comments will follow. But you can see here that we have seen increasing popularity in electric vehicles. So I think by virtue of this program, and the Department of Infrastructure is also keeping track through motor vehicle registrations, the total number of electric vehicles on the roads in Northwest Territories. But we have seen considerable growth in the popularity. One of the barriers often for adopting a new technology is getting those who sell those technologies on board. And we've made a considerable amount of progress in working with dealerships, particularly here in Yellowknife and down in Hay River, on stocking electric vehicles so that customers who are coming in to look at a new vehicle can actually see those EVs on the lot and consider them as a purchase in contrast to a gas combustion engine type of vehicle. So we've, as I said, we made a lot of progress. The dealerships are very much on board. And so, you know, we recognize that funding for this program has been kind of provided year to year. And we had a bit of an anomaly last year with rebates also available for electric bikes. And you can see in the table, the lower right-hand corner, it was a very popular item for people. And so we provided many rebates for that. This year, again, we've reverted solely to rebates for electric vehicles. And between our rebates, which this year were $5,000 per vehicle, combined with a federal point-of-sale rebate program, which can also be as high as $5,000, you know, consumers can see real savings from switching to electric vehicles, which is, you know, the idea behind providing these kinds of incentives. So we would be very interested in continuing on with this program if funders are amenable. All right, so I just wanted to share a little bit kind of on the amount that Arctic Energy Alliance, by virtue of the funding we've received from the territorial and federal governments over the last several years, what we've been able to invest in the NWT landscape of renewable energy. So I won't go through all the numbers here, but I would just highlight that you can see here through 2019-2020, for those first three columns outlining the Alternative Energy Technologies Program, the Energy Efficiency Incentive Program, and the Community Wood Stove Program, from 2019-2020 through 2023-2024. This was a combination of funding from both the territorial and the federal governments under the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, in 2024-25, we have now reverted back to 2018-2019 funding levels. So there was a significant drop-off, and as a result, far fewer projects were able to support with this funding. So as I mentioned, the Energy Efficiency Incentive Program is closed to new applications at this point. The Alternative Energy Technologies Program is very close to closing, and we were not able to offer the Community Wood Stove Program this year. On the biomass program, that's been a steady source of investment from the territorial government, and we very much appreciate that, and we look forward to being able to provide those kind of capacity building projects going forward with that funding. The EV rebate program you'll see here has had a bit of an ebb and flow with the funding peaking in the 2023-24 fiscal year and then coming down fairly dramatically this fiscal year. Again, this is one of those programs that has been sort of a year-to-year program, but we would, again, be interested in continuing to provide this program. And I would just reference the 2030 energy strategy from the GNWT itself, which has a target of reducing emissions from transportation by 10% per capita by 2030, which, you know, of all of our programs, I would say moving from a gas combustion engine to an electric vehicle probably provides one of the biggest emission reductions that we see with any of our programs. The last column there is reducing energy poverty. This has been funding provided exclusively by the Department of Infrastructure. So this began last fiscal year and continued into this fiscal year. Last year, we used that funding in combination with some of the low-carbon economy funding to deliver the Community Wood Stove program, as well as another program we created in 1920, the Low-Income Home Winterization Program. So we've really focused this funding on trying to address energy poverty, which we know is a major issue right across the territory. This year, we've used some of that funding for the Firewood Access Project. And perhaps most kind of timely, in January we'll be launching what we're calling Winterization Walkthrough Program, where we'll be sending 2 of our technical staff who will be working with our regional coordinator out of our Norman Wells office to do walkthroughs of approximately 20 to 30 homes in Norman Wells and provide advice and recommendations on how they can make their homes more energy efficient. We will also be bringing materials such as window plastic, weather stripping kits for doors and some other things that are kind of the low-hanging fruit to help people reduce their energy consumption in their homes and ultimately lower their costs, which we know is a huge struggle right now in Norman Wells. So again, this is another example of sort of a year-to-year program funding that we would be very interested in seeing continue into future fiscal years so that we can continue to help northern residents with energy poverty and reducing their energy costs. And lastly, this is a small project we launched this year, kind of in recognition of the 5 years that we were operating under the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund. It's just in the current stages of beta testing, and we'll be launching this on our website very soon, but I did want to share it with the committee members. Basically, it's the idea here is that we would like to share the results of AEA's work from the last 5 years, going back to 2019, 2020. So the interface is map-based. People visiting the website will be able to go and look at any individual community in the Northwest Territories, and we're very proud to say there isn't a single community that we have not worked with in some form or fashion over the last 5 years. And what we're showing here is when you click on a community, you can see the cost savings, the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, electricity saved, and other things by virtue of both renewable energy projects and energy efficiency projects. We're here today talking about renewable energy, but I would just note by virtue of some of these graphs, you can see how important energy efficiency is, in fact, to reducing expenditures for energy as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other energy-related metrics. From here, you can click on the full energy report, which would take you to a page showing sort of those different metrics of how different communities have been performing. And this is only, I'll mention, related to projects that AEA has funded. But we've basically built the foundation that we'd like to be able to expand the platform in future years, perhaps to take into consideration other things. You can also link to or connect to energy profiles for each community in the Northwest Territories, which is an exercise we undertake every few years to kind of provide an energy snapshot for each and every community in the Northwest Territories, such that they have good information to be able to make some decisions about their own energy usage and consumption in their communities. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Hike. That was a lot. But you managed to get through it in the most efficient, energy-efficient manner. I'm here all week for the millions of subscribers. Keep sending those Taylor Swift hearts in. That said, I believe I have Ms. Kate first with the round of questions, and see, given our time, we'll just get right into it. So, Ms. Kate, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for your presentations. Very informative. In the infrastructure presentation, there was a quick mention of, for lack of a better term, wood chip issues, and I'm curious if you could expand on why wood chips perhaps are not the best source of biomass. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kate. I'll go to Director Sexton for that, and we'll see where it takes us next. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think more appropriate would be say there's pros and cons against other options. One of the issues with wood chips is they are a little bit more difficult in terms of standardization. So when you buy wood pellets, there's certain humidity, certain ash content, whatnot. Wood chips tend to be more variable, so they can cause technical issues when you use them. On the other hand, as Mr. Hike suggested, they can be cheaper. So, you know, right now there's no wood chips being used. It could be one of the options for local biomass development, though, because they are sort of less processing required as opposed to a local wood pellet production. But yeah, there's pros and cons to it for sure, and one of it has to do with quality issues. But they can be cheaper.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton. Anything further, Ms. Reid? Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, also in your presentation, you mentioned that you were seeking out ways to support local wood pellet production development, and you spoke, I think, specifically in the Yellowknife area. Committee has been doing a little bit of preliminary research in this area, and it's my understanding that there's been previous work done in the Bodell on willow production as biomass, and I was wondering if the department could speak a little bit to their knowledge on those projects. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Reid. Director Sexton on that, please.
Okay, so I know there is a project in the North Slate. I don't think, I believe it's being led by one of the Indigenous governments. I'm not sure it's my place to speak about it right now. And I don't know about the willow development. Certainly there was a study many years ago looking at willow development, I think, in Clavik, but perhaps Mr. Chair, Mr. Hike might know. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton. Yes, if you don't know, no problem. No problem. Yeah, we're a friendly committee, don't worry. Mr. Hike, if you have any insight on that, and if you folks don't, if you have any insight as to where you can help assist us in the sense of point us as well, that would be also helpful. So Mr. Hike, any information you have would be fantastic.
So I believe it was Fort McPherson, if I'm not mistaken, and yes, it was. The idea was to chip willows, which basically grow like weeds, and you can take them down one year and they'll be back the next year. I think there were challenges with moisture content storage, those types of things, which, you know, as wood chips have become a much more popular fuel source for biomass heating systems, standards have been developed. Europe is quite a bit ahead of Canada in that regard. So I think it's, you know, it could be a timely thing to revisit, but ultimately we will need to see that kind of coming from the regions and communities.
Thank you very much. If we're good, we'll go on to Mr. Julian. He's the next person on the list. Please.
Thank you. Definitely have lots of questions for today because we had two different presenters. My first one, I'll go to the GNWT presentation. I note that there was a study on on supply chains and I guess increasing supply in communities. I'm curious if there's any work that's been done on growing or fostering local supply. So rather than kind of bringing pellets up, what's the work that we're doing on kind of increasing local supply? I think we started to touch on the pellets or on the chips, but yeah, I mean, I think in any case, obviously, it would be preferable to not even have to worry about you know, the shipping aspect of things if we can get supply chains working in communities. I know that, like, pretty much, I think it's fair to say virtually every community in the NWT outside of the Arctic communities have, you know, abundant biomass surrounding them. So there's a lot of potential in the NWT. The challenge seems to be kind of harnessing that. I'm curious to know what kind of work is going on, what work needs to occur to kind of increase these local supply chains, and what are some of the barriers to that?
Director Sexton, if you would with that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we, a number of years ago, we did do feasibility study for biomass combined heat and power in Fort Simpson. And we looked at local supply. And of course, things have changed since then. But some of the things that we came across was it's very labor intensive and fuel intensive to harvest biomass. So that adds to the cost. So you have to go out and you have to collect your heavy equipment or whatnot to collect the biomass, and then you have to chip it. And then for wood chips, you have to often you have to dry it. So there's energy involved in that. And if you're going to wood pellets, there's another step of you have to dry it more and compress it into pellets. So the study did show was quite costly on a unit per energy basis to harvest it locally. That's not to say that it isn't possible. So what you would need to do is just look at, it could be an excellent economic development opportunity, however, right? So you'd have to look at the full business case and look at what kind of economic development supports there would be out there to do it in terms of the capital cost of buying the equipment and the pelletizing and the wood chippers and things, and the drying equipment and things like that. So the benefit of the wood pellet supply that we have is that it's from a waste product that's already dry on site at sawmills. So it's hard to compete against those economics. It's not to say it's not possible, but it is one of the things that we would love to encourage is local development of supply, because it does create jobs and keeps the money within the NWT.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Morris.
Thank you. I'll stick with GNWT questions for my first round. Just kind of looking at what was presented about the energy strategy, something that I've wondered about is whether we need to be shifting our focus somewhat in terms of what we're trying to achieve first, like prioritizing our actions. And just thinking about my most recent experience going through the riding during the election and kind of seeing the energy issues that people are facing. And the biggest one that stood out to me by far was the idea of people getting caught in sort of the cost of living trap of being on an expensive fuel source like heating oil, because of that expensive fuel source, not really being able to save up for and buy a new furnace that would kind of either be more efficient or a different fuel source altogether. And so they're caught in this trap of kind of dependence on carbon. Carbon is causing them to not be able to get off of it. And so it struck me as a significant problem. And I wonder about whether we should be thinking about shifting our visioning towards kind of helping people first as opposed to some of the large-scale energy projects. And I'm curious to hear from the department their perspective on this. I mean, it's easy to kind of focus on some of the big budget items. I mean, certainly as I've kind of become more familiar with GNWT budgets, like the Inuvik Wind project has really stood out to me. We spent a huge amount of money on that. And I start to think about, like, if we had taken that money and spent it on helping individuals, the impact that would have on each individual's livelihood is huge, as opposed to large-scale energy projects kind of have a bit of a different vision to them. And so I'm curious to hear from the department about what they think about the potential of that kind of shift. Maybe that is built into the plan more than I realize. I'm curious to hear thoughts on kind of what we're doing for individuals and the level to which that becomes the priority over kind of larger scale projects. Yeah, if that question makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll first start with Deputy Minister Ludit. Thank you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's definitely a good point. It's something that we try to, I guess we're trying to strike that balance between looking at the larger projects, which obviously really impact the emissions but we also still want to do the stuff that's, helping our residents and making things more affordable, making things more reliable, that sort of thing, strengthening the supply chain. When we're having issues related to climate change and not able to get up, the wood stove program obviously is a good one that strengthens that supply chain where people aren't going to be so reliant on the cost of diesel. The wind turbine in Inuvik, even with the cost escalations and the lifespan of the project, still has a small business case financially, but it really eliminates the burning of 3 million liters of diesel per year. So obviously, the length of that project being 30 years, we're looking at about 90 million liters in savings. So we do need to strike that balance and do both. But with that, I'll turn it over to Director Sexton.
Director, if you would help as well, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, I think the term balance is key, certainly. We are in the process of, renewing the energy strategy, and so with the lens of net zero. As we go through that process, of course, energy affordability will be key, and how we best support individuals and communities will continue to be of major concern. Within this presentation, you've seen sort of a mix here where GNWC's provided a presentation on some of the larger things we've done, and then Arctic Energy Alliance provides very much the more granular services to residents and communities. Ultimately, as we head towards any sort of sustainable energy transition, we're probably going to need a little bit of both, right? We're going to need to look at our larger energy supply. We all know there's issues with the electricity system, with aging infrastructure, but we also really do need to focus on the individuals and how the cost of living and how they can be more sustainable. I will note that we are, in terms of as was first mentioned, in terms of individuals already spending all their money on heating, so therefore they can't afford the upgrades. We are working currently with the federal government to do a low-income type program to help those homeowners with that exact issue, and it would be a direct service delivery, which is we would go in and actually do it for them so that they wouldn't have to do any upfront costs. So this type of thing we are looking at and working on and very much concerned with.
Oh, I have Ms. Morgan. Please, Ms. Shona, if you're ready. We'll find you.
That's all. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Robert. I wanted to follow up on the wood chips idea. It sounds like, Mr. Hayek from Arctic Energy Alliance, that you saw a system operating in BC at Simon Fraser where they seem to have ironed out some of these problems. It's a large-scale system. Can you give us some insights into what it might have taken for that project to overcome some of those challenges, and whether there are learnings that can be applied here, or what basically can be applied here so we could get a similar wood chip system underway? Thanks.
Mr. Hayek, when you're ready.
It's on. Oh, it just goes. Oh, I'm over here now. Okay. No? Okay. Yes, so I'm not an expert on the Burnaby Mountain system, but my understanding from the site tour, they started with the university itself, and then later there's a large, I believe it's called University City or something. It's a large residential area that's currently under development. So they were able to start on a relatively small scale and then expand out. Interestingly enough, it's a kind of a public-private partnership between the university and a company called Corex. Some folks who have been around Yellowknife for a long time may remember that Corex was actually involved in discussions about a decade or more ago about a district energy system in Yellowknife. And so Corex actually owns and operates the heating plant. So they brought the expertise and kind of the network of experts to be able to put that together. The fuel source for them is actually, it's 100% recycled wood. So they've had a 5-year contract with one supplier that basically visits landfills in the Lower Mainland in British Columbia, collects clean waste wood, and then chips it for use in the system. It blew my mind to kind of visit the facility in terms of the scale of it. They had, we were shown the storage facility for the wood chips themselves, and they said at the coldest time of year, which granted it's Vancouver, is not very cold, they may get 8 or 9 tractor trailers delivering chips in a given day. So it's a massive scale. But again, they've by virtue of that, Simon Fraser has pretty much achieved its greenhouse gas emission reduction targets several years in advance of when they thought they would. So I think there's a couple elements there in terms of bringing players to the table who have experience in those kinds of things, and perhaps the deep pockets to be able to fund that kind of project. And then, yeah, basically it's figuring out your fuel source, laying that out, bringing the customers on board, which, in a place like Burnaby Mountain, you've got the university. So it's a pretty simple relationship. A little more complex if, say, you're in someplace like downtown Yellowknife. But none of that is insurmountable in my view. And I think there's opportunities to learn from what other big district heating systems are doing in other parts of the country, for sure.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hike. Ms. Shona, further, please. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Ms. Director Sexton.
And interesting to hear about how that was reclaimed wood, which means that it was already dry, which is one of the things I mentioned earlier, is that drying of the wood chips is an issue and consistent quality. In the NWT, we looked at some of the issues and opportunities in Fort Simpson, like I said, for combined heat and power. The key thing is scale. The smaller the project, the more expensive it is. So the bigger it is, the better cost per unit of heating you get. And then there's, so the smaller scale systems will cost more. Fort Simpson, for example, and then with scale becomes its own problem, including biomass supply, right? So, but in Fort Simpson, one of the actually limiting factors, believe it or not, was the boiler was big enough in size that it became, this is essentially a pressure vessel, right? It's something under pressure. You then required a certain number of power engineers, which are highly paid individuals, just to operate that facility. And all those people's salaries are paid for through electricity rates. So it just spiraled into, we needed the scale to make it economic, but the scale meant there's other issues in terms of supply and storage. And so, it's one of those case-by-case basis things. And I think each project would require its own feasibility study to look at the opportunities and challenges in costing of raw material versus storage and heat sales. So it's a good question, but I would say ultimately it's possible. It's just challenges as usual in the north, right? Yeah.
Thank you for that. Ms. Shona, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robert. So my second question, you've mentioned that you were studying or looking at limitations for pellet storage in certain communities. And I know that the GNBT has taken a substantial role in securing petroleum supply chains through the Petroleum Products Division and sort of realizing this is an essential fuel and service, and so does play a role in transporting, storing, ensuring that gets there. So I guess I'm wondering if the GNBT could similarly play a stronger role in the supply chain, securing supply options and storage for pellets. And it looks like you've been looking at that, but I wonder what the plan is to move forward with either funding or directly supplying, say, storage in certain communities where that's a challenge, and where there are challenges with limited supply options, helping to secure those supply chains. Thank you.
Deputy Minister, can you provide some insight on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question. It is something, just to let you guys know, I do have some allergy issues. I don't have a cold or anything, so my voice keeps going. But that's a great question. We are looking at obviously the distribution and using marine transportation to bring up the wood pellets to the communities and everything. And it is something we will probably have to look at as the programs expand. It's something typically in the larger communities, if there's a private retailer or a private wholesaler that would like to sell, we don't compete against private markets, of course. But in areas where there is the absence of that market, we would certainly be willing to we should be looking at how we're going to be supporting the programs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Look forward to the update on that down the road. Ms. Kate, you'd like to jump in on round 2, and I don't have anybody who hasn't spoken on round 1. So that said, please, when you're ready.
Thank you. So, like Mr. Morse, I'm very excited to hear there's discussions around low-income program rebates happening, or with the feds. That's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. Sort of connecting the dots into small businesses, though. I know there has been support in the GNWT to try and make sure that we're reducing those supply chains for pellets. No success there thus far, really, in terms of scaling up any businesses to be a local supplier in the territory. But if wood chips provide complications, perhaps, what sort of work is the department doing in the wood pellet support aspect of maybe encouraging small businesses? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Minister, if you want to lead us off, and then we'll see where it goes next.
Thank you. It's not something that we've been actively engaged in with the communities at this point, or with suppliers as to the needs, but it's something obviously we want to look at. We have been doing a lot of work with Transport Canada, with Assistant Deputy Minister Robert Dick out of Vancouver, who's in charge of the supply chain office, and he's very keen on looking at the supply chains in general for the Northwest Territories and Yukon and Nunavut. He has quite an eye on the north and understands the differences supply chain as well, as we're not typically much of a supplier. We're more of a consumer, but the supply chain obviously has a real role in the Northwest Territory. So it's one of those. It's part of that, but we haven't really engaged any companies as far as that. But it's something I will take back to the office, and I'll have a conversation with the Department of Industry and Tourism and Investment as well as how we can do that better. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, and if you have anything further update with respect to that, whether it's in a month from now or a couple months from now, if you could forward it to the committee, therefore we can share, Ms. Kate as well as everyone else has some answers in the sense of what's happening, and I believe Mr. Director would like to further comment with respect to that. Thank you.
As of right now, a lot of our focus has been security of supply, regardless of where it comes from. We would be happy to hear from the private sector who would be interested in advancing wood pellets or wood chips, for sure. Up until recently, we had the greenhouse gas grant program that type of project would be eligible for. We are renegotiating the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund with the federal government, and we hope to put forward a similar program going forward that would help with greenhouse gas reduction projects. So we are very much interested in that type of work if the private sector is doing it.
Thank you, Director. Ms. Kate, anything further? Are we at it?
Yeah, and I apologize, I can't recall, I believe it might have been Mr. Haig's presentation and not infrastructures, but there was discussion of sort of trying to make those circular economies and shorten those supply chains, and it seems really pertinent to the discussion, so I'm glad those discussions are going on, but I think there's more work to be done, as the Deputy Minister has alluded to. So, yeah, more of a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kate. I now have Mr. Julian next. Please, if you would like to jump in.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to ask kind of a high-level question of both presenters. And that is just that, part of the reason for bringing it in front of us today is committees considering a project focusing on kind of the intersection between community economic development and renewable energy. And I'm curious to hear from kind of both AEA and GNWT if they're interested in commenting on areas where there's gaps in our knowledge or gaps that committee could be focused on, and areas where you might suggest we could have the most impact in terms of an investigation, yeah, I'm very curious to hear if what the gaps are. I think we've been identifying some of them. I mean, Mr. Sexton talked about the need for a feasibility study when he was kind of making the comments about scale. So yeah, I'm curious to hear from both presenters kind of what are some areas that you think we could have the most impact as our small committee and the capacity that we have in terms of investigating changes in direction we could be suggesting to the government, or just things that stones that haven't been turned yet. I'm curious to hear from both presenters on that. Thanks.
Director, if you would please.
Thank you. That's a very good question, and of course, one of the ones that we struggle with as well in the GNWT about how to make this work and work better. There's a lot of good projects going on across the north, a lot of federal funding flowing in. One of the things we'd like to see more of is better coordination amongst all the parties. And this is one of the things I think we're going to be working towards. There's a lot of good work happening, and if we can share our knowledge and expertise and support each other, I think that we'd go a long way across the north to make sure that projects succeed. That's what we want to see, is good projects succeed, right? And there's an ongoing challenge with the economics of many of these projects. It's not like in the south where you can put in massive solar farms and the economics are amazing because you have scale. We're talking small scale here with a difficult logistical and operating environment with limited capacity and know-how in a lot of cases. And quite frankly, not just that, if people are busy. If you're in a community and you're trying to run a renewable energy project, you're already a busy person running your community. So, I think, more work towards a cohesive, collaborative approach, I think, is one of the things that, I'd like to see us work towards.
Thank you. Deputy Minister, please.
Mark, just reiterating, I think, obviously the economics is always a concern. We're working as Mr. Hike had noted, we haven't identified funding pots for future years. I'll use the Woodstow program. It's probably my favorite program that we have. It gets to the end users. It provides training, as Mr. Hike noted, and employment, and that supply chain. When people aren't having to burn high-priced diesel when the river levels are low. We are anticipating that, no announcement yet, but we are anticipating that we are going to be getting funding for that, and we continue to lobby the federal government for funding on all these fronts. We don't. It may not be on April 1st that the program starts up again, and likely probably not. But it's a program that we anticipate will be moving forward. But funding is always obviously an issue in everything we do. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Mr. Hite, did you have anything you wanted to add? We're working through our guests, so wouldn't want to leave you out. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think there's a couple elements of this which Mr. Sexton and Mr. alluded to. One of the things we've found is that the willingness to adopt a new fuel source or a new technology is often related to the security of supply of that fuel source. So where we've seen the greatest uptake, for example, in biomass space heating, is where bulk storage exists. We see that now in Yellowknife, we see that in Hay River, we've seen that in Inuvik, we've actually seen that in Norman Wells. And once people, businesses, governments have security of supply, of course they're much more willing to move in that direction. I think it's an interesting consideration that one of the committee members raised in terms of the Fuel Services Division and their role in supplying alternative fuels. That's probably worthy of some exploration. I think one of the things we also do beyond sort of our funding and advice programs, we support communities in community energy planning. One of the fundamental principles of a strong community energy plan is identifying locally available resources. So cordwood is an obvious one for us, and we'd like to be able to support the adoption of using more cordwood for space heating, and I alluded to that in a few different parts of my presentation. So I think that's kind of an important component as well, as identifying those locally available sources of fuel. I would also say looking back at Mr. Sexton's first or second slide that laid out the pie chart of greenhouse gas emissions in the territory, it is important to recognize that space heating and even electricity generation are very small parts of the GHG profile in the Northwest Territories. And so looking at, and it will take a change in mindset. I know it's come up in the Assembly before, but the idea of further exploring renewable diesel, fuel sources that we wouldn't require massive changes or investments in the type of infrastructure we're using, but finding new sources of fuel that would work with that infrastructure. And I know the Department of Infrastructure has done some analysis already on kind of the current state of affairs with things like renewable diesel. So I think there's opportunities to perhaps look more into that, along with taking sort of a pan-territorial approach with other territorial partners. The other thing that I would mention, I'm often kind of fascinated by the economics of our utilities here in the north. One of the challenges, obviously, that our utilities face is that we don't have a rapidly growing market for electricity. It has either grown very, very slowly or is stagnant, or in some cases is actually shrinking. And part of that shrinkage is by virtue of the work that Arctic Energy Alliance does by providing more energy efficient options for people to reduce their energy consumption. And so it's, we have a challenge, and again, credit to the Department of Infrastructure for looking at measures working towards rate stabilization. An important component of which is how can we sell more power? Where can we use electricity that we're not currently using it? Transportation and space heating are the obvious answers. So that element is big because, we encourage solar PV, for example. But the fact of the matter is the people who can most easily afford solar PV will sort of withdraw from the rate base of the utilities. The utilities have fixed infrastructure costs that they have to cover, and ultimately that shrunken rate base will consist more and more of people who can't afford to make those switches and those changes. So that's a tough kind of tension in the system that I think requires some deeper analysis as to how we address that. I think one of the potential answers is more utility scale renewable electricity generation. It was interesting, as I mentioned earlier, I was down in Vancouver in early November, and one of the things that I observed from talking with some folks from BC Hydro is they will periodically put out what they call calls for power. And basically it's the utility will project, here's how much power we're going to need 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And apart from their own infrastructure projects to increase their own generating capacity, they are looking to the private sector. They are looking to Indigenous partners to come forward with proposals for larger utility scale type renewable electricity systems. So it's a bit of an innovative way to kind of put it back to potential partners in the territory to say, this is what we think we're going to need. How do you think you could contribute? Which isn't to say that every proposal is going to be feasible or accepted, but it is a way, I think, to open up the space a little more broadly to potential partners and ultimately, hopefully, to kind of innovative solutions to some of the challenges we're looking at.
Thank you for that. I'll go back to Mr. Julian for another question. We're going to push towards closing, so we'll squeeze in a last couple from members, and I have a few of myself, so we won't try to drag it on too long. Our millions of subscribers have to probably get back to their day. We don't want to take them away from the efficiency of the world. So that said, Mr. Julian, then I'll go to Ms. Shauna, and I don't think I have anyone online who wants to have questions, so we'll cut it off at that point, and I'll ask my couple quick ones, and then we'll call it a morning. So please, if you finish with your second one.
Thanks. This question specifically for Arctic Energy Alliance. Just noting the challenges that we're having with funding for some of these programs, kind of the point that I made earlier to GNWT about, focusing on low-income individuals. I don't know the level to which AEA kind of income tests their programming, but I just note that, some programs are kind of inherently focused on people who can already afford to make transitions. So people who, Mr. Sexton mentioned that program that I'm very excited to hear about, that effectively just goes into people's homes and doesn't require an outlay of cash for them, and is focused on low-income individuals stuck in that trap. And certainly that is kind of, as I already stated, my first and foremost concern is helping people that are stuck in that affordability trap. And just noting that, the affordability trap can be real for people even who wouldn't be considered low income. But to get to the question, I mean, do you think we should be focusing more on kind of income tested programs or programming which is focused more on low income individuals, such as like the wood stove program, the reducing energy poverty program, and prioritizing those over programs which would, be likely to benefit more privileged individuals? And I guess the second question is, like, how would you feel if on our side we started kind of setting those priorities on our end and saying, we'd prefer to see funding that AEA receives used for such things? What are kind of the pros and cons with that kind of prioritization, and what are your thoughts on it? Thanks.
Thank you. If you would, please.
So I guess things. Begin by saying that as a relatively small nonprofit, we are not super eager about getting into means testing the clients that are coming to us. We've addressed that, and I talked about the operational review that was done of the organization back around 2017, 2018. As the committee member alluded to, one of the big gaps in our funding offer was clearly programming focused specifically on low-income households. With the wood stove program and with the low-income home winterization program, which are both based on partnership models, we rely on our community partners to identify the households that will receive whether it's wood stoves or winterization kits for their homes. We put our trust in the fact they know their community better than we do, and they will identify those households that are in greatest need. I can say with some confidence, in the case of the wood stove program in particular, it is very much geared towards elders on fixed incomes, single parent families, and people who are struggling with those types of energy costs. I would mention as well that, I had mentioned the winterization walkthroughs we're planning in Norman Wells in January. It would be relevant to the committee member who asked the question. We are currently piloting, actually starting today, in Northlands Trailer Park. We reached out to the board of the condo corporation to find some willing homeowners that we could work with there. And I believe they've identified 8 to 10 households. So starting today, as I said, we'll be going into those households with residential energy advisors who can provide some solid advice on improvements they can make, and we'll be bringing some materials along with us to be able to help in that regard. So those are a couple elements, but I certainly take the point and agree with it that with finite budgets and limited resources, it's important that we focus on the areas of greatest need. I think that's one of the reasons that reducing energy poverty program funding we've received the last couple of years has been an important component for us to be able to continue that focus on those in greatest need and those experiencing energy poverty. And the final thing I'll mention on that front, we do have challenges in terms of some of the criteria that comes with certain pots of funding federally, whereby the federal government has taken the approach they will no longer provide funding for fossil fuel-based heating systems. It was mentioned in comments from a committee member earlier that encouraging people to move to more efficient furnaces and boilers, whether it's fossil fuel-based or something else, is important. AEA has taken the approach that we would like to push the envelope on the efficiency of boilers and furnaces that people are using. And so we have in the past been able to provide incentives for higher efficiency furnaces and boilers. Because of the reluctance of the federal government to fund fossil fuel-based heating systems, we've actually had to remove those from the list of eligible products that we can offer incentives on. So again, there's a bit of a tension there that where we don't see a lot of viable alternatives at this time to fossil fuel-based heating systems, and we would like people to be able to be more efficient in their use of that fuel and thereby save money. But there are some, intergovernmental considerations that need to be worked out if we're going to be able to support those kinds of projects in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Ms. Shauna, and then I'll work towards the close of the presentation, so please feel free to ask your questions.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up. There was comments about trying to promote electrification of heat in the South Slave in particular. And there was a program, I think Arctic Energy Alliance, you mentioned that there wasn't much uptake. There's some policy challenges. You're working with some proposals for electricity rate issues with PUB. I'm wondering if you can explain more about lack of uptake. Is it possible for people to get funding to get electric heat in their homes, even if it's interruptible, and still have, say, other, backup sources of heat? Or is it that more funding is required for NTPC to change some of its infrastructure? Or I just wondered if you could give some more specifics on, what a possible path forward could be to overcome some of these challenges. Thank you.
Okay, Director, it looks like you're the one everyone's looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the answer to all those questions is yes. No, it's multifaceted, of course. We haven't seen a lot of uptake in the South Slave. The GNFT has availed of the program. Right now, it's geared towards general service clients and government. So residential clients can't avail of the rate. We are looking at how to improve the rate design on this to make it more attractive to people. Part of the issue is it's interruptible, and then so that means everyone has to have a secondary, or at least a primary or secondary heating system. So now you have two primary heating systems, which is expensive. There is funding for this, like through the AEA, as Mark said. The fund, we had the standalone funding program, and we moved it to the AETP program, so you can still get funding for electric furnaces and heaters and whatnot. There are going to be capacity constraints on the electricity system and the local grids, so that speaks to your question about utilities. So one of the things we do have to look at is what does electrification of end uses mean in terms of grid expansion and transmission expansion and supply expansion. So it's the whole slate of issues that we're looking at, and we're confident that we can, at least with the rate design, increase uptake and make it at least more economically viable for people to look at it.
Thank you for that, and I believe Mr. Hike would like to add, please.
Mr. Chair, yeah, just to relay some kind of client feedback we've received from people we've talked to in the South Slave about potentially implementing electric heat. As Mr. Sexton alluded to, the interruptible component is a big barrier, I think, for a lot of people to make that decision, because you're required under that program to maintain a heating system, another heating system that could cover 100% of your heating load. Potential clients are then being asked to invest in a whole other heating system that at any moment could have the switch turned off. So it's from that perspective, it's a bit of a challenge. I would say, kind of as we were in the early stages of offering that program back in 2019, 2020, we did work with one client in Fort Smith to do a cost analysis of electric heat versus high efficiency propane versus high efficiency oil versus biomass. Electric heat was cost competitive with both high efficiency propane and oil. However, biomass was still, at that time at least, a little bit cheaper. And again, one of the other challenges, and I think it's related to concerns about the capacity of the system as a whole in the Tolson system, is expanding to residential properties, which maybe there's not that capacity right now. The one sort of thing in the back of everybody's minds is if Pine Point came back on stream, then that might be such a huge drawer of power they would have to switch the switch off for everybody else. So I think at the policy level, there's some discussions to be had there.
Thank you for that. Ms. Shawn, no, nothing further? Okay, thanks. Looks like we're heading to a close, so what I'll do is I have a couple comments, and I'm going to say I'd like to think brief questions. After listening to the presentation, I too could probably, not that I intend to, but could be here an hour just asking questions about the types of things. But I'll be as efficient as possible, and that is not intended as a pun this time around. Not speaking against it, but there is a clear, I'm leading to a point, and I remember reading a few years ago that after about the range of 250 kilometers, when you start bringing pellets away from the source, they lose their efficiency, both in cost and the GHG benefits. But that said, you can counteract that by bringing volume in the sense of making it the balance then changes the argument. I don't remember the exact distance because it's been quite a few years ago. But that said, it also speaks to the larger picture, which is if the GNWT is in the petroleum product division, no different than my colleague had just said a few minutes ago, why wouldn't the GNWT start asking themselves the question is, why are we not planning to bring giant quantums into, for example, Fort Good Hope, and then would spur off the synergy of if we're heating the school through these types of mechanisms and we're heating maybe a government building such as the seniors facility, all of a sudden the northern store says, hey, wait a minute, now we have a constant secure supply of cost-efficient, energy-efficient, greenhouse gas messaging, all of that stuff. And goodness, instead of milk at a 2-liter being $38, might drop to $22. And that could be the world of difference for somebody. I mean, I don't know the value of what a jug of milk is in Fort Good Hope, nor am I trying to sell milk at this moment, but so I don't worry about the price. But the point being is, there are different ways of saying how do we make this work. The last point I'll make on this particular area is that when you establish this in when we're heating our facilities, whether in Sigachik, all of a sudden we could do district heating, and so instead of bringing this to supply, we can start, the GNWT could say, hey, why don't we connect the churches through district heating? You will still need oil or propane as a backup, but that said, that leads to the next problem. My understanding is there's a policy, I think, at least through the city, and I don't know if it's a GNWT overseeing policy, and this is where sort of my first question lies, is that you can't run on a pellet-only system. You still need backups, and you still need other options. And so where in Europe you don't necessarily need that. Now, I can appreciate in Central Europe you don't have the same cold temperatures, but maybe in Sweden you do. So that's got to be some of the problems. So speaking to the broader accessibility problem and the long-term planning, maybe could we start with how do we balance those? How do we balance some of those challenges, or work in the GNWT, including Arctic Energy Alliance, provide some vision, proposal, and maybe some hope if we're trying to meet some of our challenges? Did you want me to start with you, Deputy Minister?
So, thank you for that. Certainly, I think it's something we're going to have to be, keeping. I guess looking at the latest trends, looking at opportunities. I think, this file is very interesting to me because it's evolving so quickly, and answers that we're giving you today may not be the answer in 5 years from now or a couple of years from now, just because I sit on the board for the Transportation Advisory Council for Western Canada, and it's an interesting board because it's comprised of infrastructure or government, industry, academia, and labor, and so you get the vantage points of everybody, and we have presentations, for what people are doing with their fleets, from CN to C-SPAN, the shipping company, and looking at some of their challenges, some of their concerns about we're trying to go towards the net zero, but we're not sure what the dominant fuels are going to be. We're not sure what the fuel supplies are going to be like at that point. So I think I think we do have a role in the smaller communities of and we'll look at what those opportunities are for as far as getting the products in there, and I know there's big capital investments to house some of this stuff, and maybe maybe there's potentially federal opportunities and everything as we move down that road. But I think the biggest thing for the GNWT, we have to be looking at innovation. We have to be engaging with our community governments. I always say that I never tell a community what they want or what they need. They should be telling us what they need, right? And so when we're working with them, they come out and and that's for every facet of what the government of Northwest Territories does, whether we're putting in a building or whether we're looking at supply chains and stuff. But I do think I think, we've got some great feedback on the supply chain stuff and how we can support those communities from this committee today, and I think we'll take that back and look into some of those opportunities. Thank you.
Mr. Hike, did you have anything you wanted to add before I get to my second question? And just before I say that, by the way, don't forget to listen to community MLAs when you say you listen to community suggestions. Because it is a lonely voice sometimes on our side of the house if no one's listening. So, Mr. Hike, if you would please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, you mentioned the point about the requirement to have backup heating systems that can cover the load if you are looking to use biomass for space heating. It's actually an insurance industry issue, not a government issue. So I think because Europe is probably a little bit ahead of us and a little more progressive on these things, maybe it's not the same issue there. But for many years now, that's been the challenge, is that a home that tries to have only biomass heating as its only heating system is uninsurable. So that's the big barrier there. Again, it's, I guess, a policy issue, but one that's somewhat outside of government at the moment. Just on the distances traveled and sort of the value of different fuel sources, we in the Northwest Territories, our primary supply, the vast majority is out of Lacrete, Alberta, northern Alberta, which is relatively close to High Level. Just in the last couple of years, there was actually a new pellet mill built in High Level. So that's, if whether our oil is coming from refineries in Edmonton or pellets are traveling half that distance from Lacrete or High Level, it kind of mitigates, I think, some of those distance questions. There is, I believe, the ratio is approximately 2 to 1 in terms of the energy content of oil versus pellets. So volume-wise, you need twice as many pellets to provide the same amount of heat as oil. But those kinds of things, I think, from a bigger picture viewpoint, they're not insurmountable challenges in terms of as Mr. Ludert was saying, listening to communities to determine sort of what their needs are, and then trying to support it, whether it's the GNWT or Arctic Energy Alliance, in putting in place the underlying foundation to succeed with that energy transition that I think virtually all communities are looking to achieve.
Thank you. I appreciated the insurance requirement. I couldn't remember exactly, so I appreciate that gladly. Okay, I just have one more area, and I'll be relatively quick. I just want to point out that from a full disclosure point of view in this context of someone who's committed to this, over 15 years ago, I think I put a pellet boiler in my house, and it's made a world of difference. And one of the things, and this is going to go to Arctic Energy Alliance, is some discussion, and I would call it kind of cloud sharing. I'm not sure what the right term is in the context of your information and your website. And you pointed out that screen, and it got me thinking quickly. So the old rule of thumb was if you couldn't pay back your investment in 8 years, it wasn't considered a good investment. And it's funny, I think you mentioned it about powered shrinkage in the sense of less usage, and it's true. I've had a discussion with the Northland utilities in the past, whereas everyone's switching to more efficiency made power actually more expensive technically because people aren't using it, but you still have to create the same potential for the potential, which means in essence the efficiency of power just went down and costs went up, even though you've now lowered your individual consumption. So it's quite an interesting paradox. The reason I brought the 8-year payback, cost-benefit analysis payback, I paid for my pellet boiler in 3 years. The cost of the return and the efficiency. And it's that type of full disclosure I'm leading into my next question, which is I would encourage the Arctic Energy Alliance to sort of do that cloud sharing concept on all their projects. And the reason I say that is because if you're a consumer, whether you're tight with your money in the sense of you can't afford it, you're tight with your money because you don't like to spend it, whether you want to spend or commit to things. Some of the potential of these challenges are, I can't get someone to do an assessment on my house or building or whatnot, so that becomes a burden. The financial burden is a problem for some people, but not everyone. People want to do things, but they don't know where to start in the sense of it's a daunting or stressful task. So when you get to pages, for example, like page, it's 22 on my slide, don't worry about the site, but it's called Rebate Issued Solar PV and Biomass. I would ask the Arctic Energy Alliance to encourage this, to cloud share all your information, take out any personal specific details. So don't say, person's name and address, but say, this is the size, this is the type of home, this is the output, this is the program plan, this is what their application looked like minus their name. So when someone goes along and goes, whether they're in Good Hope or in Yellowknife or Fort Smith or, wherever, they won't be overwhelmed by, I want to do something, but I want to know how to do something. Because it seems like you have to hire someone in order just to even ask the question, can I do something like this? So my question really isn't about making information practical, and I'm a very pragmatic person in the sense of we have to make something useful and accessible. And I would encourage you, as my question, to say, is there any way you could work towards that in a timely way? So when someone is, whether they're dialing in from Colville Lake over the internet, you got to be old to say dial, obviously, and saying, I want to put solar in my house. What do I start? Well, this is what the person of a similar size did. This is relatively what it cost. And then all of a sudden they're now having a real meaningful assessment in their head saying, hey, this is doable. I know it's not doable tomorrow, but it's doable. And so I go to you, Mr. Hike from Arctic Energy Alliance, with sort of that bigger picture of making things practical. And I'm a big believer in trying to make things accessible. So Mr. Hike, if you could.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. A couple things on your questions. One, if committee members are interested, AEA undertakes an annual exercise right around this time of year, and we're just finalizing the numbers for 2024. We create what we call a fuel cost library. So there's a community-by-community breakdown of every community in the Northwest Territories, and we have our staff contact fuel suppliers and others to determine what is a liter of oil cost, what is a liter of propane cost, where natural gas might be available, we identify that cost, cordwood, and credit to the Bureau of Statistics, who is now asking questions about cordwood use as part of their 3-year community surveys, pellet costs, both by bag and by the ton, as well as electricity costs in all those communities as well. So if you're interested, the current chart on our website is under the resource section, and it's December 2023 costs, but we identify exactly all of those energy costs. So the cost of pellets has been remarkably stable over the years, unlike the volatility that we see for fossil fuels, both oil and propane. We have seen with the kind of inflationary pressures these last couple of years, the cost of pellets has gone up, but still it's not kind of the roller coaster ride that we see with